before anyone was watching. No one remembers the moment before a story becomes important. That's the strange thing about influence. It never announces itself. It just arrives quietly, and by the time people notice, it's already too late to stop. Nick Shirley didn't wake up one morning planning to change anything. There was no strategy meeting, no political intent, no blueprint to dominate a national conversation. There was just a camera, a question that wouldn't leave him alone. And the uncomfortable feeling that something everyone accepted didn't quite make sense. At the time, Nick was invisible in the way most people are invisible online, not unknown, worse, unremarkable. He posted videos like millions of others, thoughtful, calm, slightly awkward in delivery, no dramatic edits, no rage, no performative outrage, just a person trying to understand the world in public. That usually goes nowhere. The internet doesn't reward curiosity, it rewards certainty. People who ask questions are ignored, people who shout answers are amplified. Nick didn't shout, he listened. And that was the first mistake or the first advantage, depending on how you look at it. He noticed something subtle long before it became obvious to everyone else. People weren't disagreeing anymore, they were performing disagreement. Arguments had become theater, politics had become content, and truth had become optional. Nick didn't think of himself as political, he thought of himself as observant. And the more he watched, the more he realized that something fundamental had shifted. Conversations weren't about solving problems anymore, they were about signaling identity. You weren't expected to understand the other side. You were expected to defeat them or at least look like you did. Nick's instinct wasn't to attack this system, it was to slow it down. That instinct would later be described by critics as manipulative, calculated, even dangerous. But at the time, it felt almost naive. What if you just asked people to explain themselves, not aggressively, not sarcastically, not as a trap, just calmly? The first few attempts were forgettable, a handful of views. A few confused comments, the algorithm yawned and moved on. This is where most people quit, not because they lack talent, but because silence from the internet feels like rejection. Nick didn't quit, he refined. He noticed which moments made people uncomfortable, not angry, uncomfortable. The kind of discomfort that doesn't explode immediately but lingers. He noticed pauses mattered more than words, tone mattered more than facts. And letting someone speak uninterrupted was more destabilizing than confronting them. Most viral content interrupts. Nick's didn't, that was the second mistake or advantage. Then came the video. It didn't look special at first. No explosive title, no dramatic hook, just a conversation framed simply, almost plainly, but there was something different. Nick didn't argue, he didn't editorialize, he didn't correct, he let the silence do the work. Within hours, something strange happened. People didn't just watch the video, they rewatched it, they shared it without captions, they sent it privately before posting it publicly. They argued about it in comment sections that Nick never entered. The algorithm noticed the behavior shift before the media did. Retention climbed, completion rates spiked, the video refused to die. By the time traditional outlets caught on, it was already everywhere. Not because it told people what to think, but because it exposed how fragile their thinking had become. Politicians reacted before they understood why they were reacting. Commentators tried to label it, opponents tried to discredit Nick personally, a sign that the content itself was difficult to attack. That's when the story changed. Nick Shirley was no longer a guy with a camera. He was a problem, and the internet does not forgive people who reveal its mechanics. Nick didn't respond when the comments turned hostile. At first they were curious, then skeptical, then aggressive. People demanded explanations, affiliations, intentions. They wanted him to pick a side, to clarify where he stood, to reassure them that he was one of us and not one of them. He did none of that. The silence bothered people more than any statement could have. News clips began circulating out of context. A sentence here, a pause there. Analysts tried to reverse engineer meaning into moments that had never been designed to carry it. Some called him dangerous, others called him refreshing. Most couldn't decide, and that uncertainty spread faster than certainty ever does. Behind the scenes, Nick's life narrowed. Friends warned him to be careful. Messages arrived from people he'd never met offering advice he hadn't asked for. Some were well-intentioned, others weren't. The internet has a way of collapsing distance, and when that distance disappears, so does perspective. Nick kept filming, not more frequently, not louder, just more deliberately. He became selective. Less visible, each upload felt heavier, as if it carried expectations that hadn't existed before. He knew that whatever he did next would be interpreted not as content but as intent. That's when he realized something unsettling. He no longer controlled how his work was understood. Once a video crosses a certain threshold, it stops belonging to its creator. It becomes a mirror. People see what they're already afraid of, what they already believe, what they already want confirmed. Nick's videos weren't changing opinions as much as they were exposing them. Political figures began referencing viral clips without naming him, talking points shifted subtly. The language people used on television started to echo phrases from his interviews, not because they agreed with him but because the audience had absorbed the rhythm of his questions. Silence, pause, let them talk, don't interrupt. The method spread, others tried to copy it, but it didn't work the same way. When imitation arrives after intention, it feels hollow. Nick's approach wasn't a format, it was a temperament, and temperament can't be scaled. What made his work effective wasn't cleverness, it was restraint. In an environment optimized for reaction, he refused to react. That refusal forced everyone else to. Some politicians became defensive, others over-explained. A few grew visibly uncomfortable when faced with long stretches of uninterrupted speech. The audience noticed. They always do. Trust eroded in unexpected places, not because Nick told people not to trust authority, but because authority revealed itself under pressure. There was a moment, brief, easily missed, when Nick considered stepping away completely. The weight was real, the scrutiny constant. Every note of neutrality was interpreted as deception, every calm response as calculation. It's exhausting to be projected onto by millions of strangers. But he didn't leave. Instead, he narrowed further. Shorter videos, fewer appearances, more space. The internet interpreted this as strategy. In reality, it was survival. Then something interesting happened. The outrage plateaued. Without constant fuel, it couldn't sustain itself. People moved on to the next controversy, the next scandal, the next loud argument. But Nick's videos kept circulating quietly long after they stopped trending. Teachers played them in classrooms. Friends sent them to each other late at night. Comment sections became less hostile, more reflective. The noise moved elsewhere. The impact stayed. Months later, journalists began asking a different question, not who is Nick Shirley, but why did this work? The answer made people uncomfortable, because it suggested that the problem wasn't misinformation or polarization or even social media itself. The problem was impatience. People had forgotten how to listen. Nick didn't invent anything new, he simply reintroduced something old at the exact moment it had become rare. And rarity, more than novelty, is what creates value. His influence wasn't measurable in followers alone. It showed up in tone shifts, in interviews that felt slower, in audiences that began rewarding calm instead of chaos. Power didn't change hands overnight, it tilted, quietly. And that's the part most people missed. Nick never positioned himself as a leader, never claimed a movement, never asked anyone to follow him anywhere. He didn't need to. The internet had already done the work for him. By amplifying silence in a system built for noise, it revealed its own weakness.